Welcome to the Meteor Instructional Best Practices webinar series. Meteor Education is a leading educational services partner working with education providers to help them create high-impact learning experiences. As one of the largest providers of learning spaces, including furnishings and interior design services, Meteor's focus is the integration of best practices for teaching and learning to drive inquiry-based instruction, effective use of modern classrooms, and increase student achievement. Today, we are going to explore productive student conversations. Did you know the complexity of your state standards dictates the kind of conversations that students should be having in the classroom? Conversations around the content is crucial for students to deepen their understanding. Meteor has identified 5 impact learning principles that are foundational in the classroom for students. And all 5 of these learning principles directly correlate to student productive conversations. The first is authentic inquiry. This is real-world relevant questions or tasks, usually a problem or issue in the community or world, where students ask questions they want to answer, research possible answers or solutions, and back it up with evidence from various sources. The second principle is inclusiveness. All students, from struggling to high achievers, are involved and actively engaged in the task or experience. The third design principle is respectful collaboration. This is productive student conversations that build collaboration and a culture of mutual respect within the classroom. These conversations allow students to deepen their understanding, refine their thinking, and use appropriate strategies to challenge, argue, and defend their viewpoint with peers. The fourth design principle is rigor. Learning experiences that challenge students' thinking in new and interesting ways. Rigor is about what students do, and it is individual to each student's need. And finally, the fifth design principle Meteor believes in is ownership. This is about the investment a learner has in his or her learning. Students take ownership when they are engaged in meaningful experiences through student-generated questions that they care about, setting goals, solving real-world issues or problems, and participating in conversations about that content. The deliberate actions that are necessary for the types of learning experiences and productive student conversations are aligned to the research from John Hattie's Visible Learning book. We know that John Hattie's research resulted in specific indicators for success, as noted here. If we take a look at what his work cites as having a direct impact on student achievement at a 0.4 or above, we notice that academic discussions is on the list. When teachers align tasks to productive student conversations, those academic discussions, they will find success. So what does this specifically look like in the classroom in terms of teacher actions and student actions? Let's begin with your state standards. All states have standards for speaking and listening, or some call them communication standards. One key state standard for speaking and listening expects students to be able to prepare for and participate effectively in a range of conversations and collaborations with diverse partners, building on others' ideas, and expressing their own clearly and persuasively. So by the time students graduate from high school, the expectation is proficiency of this standard. And since this standard dictates that students should be collaborating, teachers need to create tasks that give students these opportunities. There is a continuum of productive student conversations. Students can engage in student talk all the way to accountable talk or sometimes Socratic seminar. The key is that the task a teacher creates dictates the level of conversation and where it would fall on this continuum. A quick way to determine the level of conversation is to know the depth of knowledge level of a given task. And as you may recall from previous webinars, there are 4 depth of knowledge levels. A task or experience in the classroom may be at a DOK 1, recall and reproduction, a DOK 2, skills and concepts, a DOK 3, strategic thinking and reasoning, or a DOK 4, extended thinking. If a task is at a DOK 1 or 2, student talk is all that is warranted. This means that students are engaging in a conversation about the content. However, they are either recalling facts they already know or discussing the content they've learned through skills, such as comparing or contrasting. There's no arguing or debating at these two levels of DOK. There's simply one answer. If a task is at a DOK 3 or 4, accountable talk, or sometimes Socratic seminar, is the type of productive student conversation you would expect to have or see in the classroom. There are multiple answers for a DOK 3 and 4 task, or there could be multiple pathways to answers that we expect students to argue or defend. These tasks require students to formulate an answer, provide credible evidence, and they have to be able to defend their answer choice. Let's look at some tasks and determine the type of student productive conversation as they align to the DOK 1, 2, or 3. These are some tasks in social studies that a teacher created. She's decided that she wants students to have a productive student conversation around all 3 tasks, but she isn't sure if she would be requiring students to engage in student talk or accountable talk. In other words, where they fall on that continuum. Let's look at the first task. It states, list and define the basic purposes of government in the United States as stated in the preamble to the United States Constitution. When we look at this task, we can see that it's a DOK 1 task. It's basic recall of information. Therefore, this teacher would provide time for student talk, for students to see if they came up with the same list and/or different definitions. There's no arguing or debating, however. The second task states, explain and give examples of how the U.S. government establishes justice, ensures domestic tranquility, provides for the common defense, and promotes the general welfare. This task is at a depth of knowledge 2 level. Students have to recall facts, which would be just a DOK 1, but they also have to provide specific examples from their text and provide a viable explanation. That raises it to a DOK 2. They're acting on the DOK 1 information. Since this is a DOK 2 task, students would participate in student talk. They might discuss their explanations, their examples, and they would make sure that they each have a full understanding of these concepts. But again, there is no arguing or debating of answers. The third task states, analyze the freedom of speech provision in the First Amendment. Provide evidence of how this amendment fulfills a purpose of the government as stated in the preamble, and explain why this is important to your life today. This task is at a DOK 3 level. It requires students to be strategic in answering, and they have to be able to defend their answer. There are multiple answers for this task. Therefore, accountable talk would be the strategy to use. Our teacher would now want to set up a structure, such as a fishbowl or some other kind of numbered heads, to provide time for students to hear each other's arguments and to have time to ask questions in order to see if they agree or disagree. Keep in mind that we want students to have time for both student talk and accountable talk. However, the majority of college and career standards are requiring students to be strategic in their thinking. They're at that DOK 3. So educators need to build up student conversations to the higher level of the continuum and set up tasks that warrant accountable talk as the strategy being used in their classrooms. So how do you set up accountable talk? How do we know if something's accountable or if it's just basic student talk? What makes something accountable? In order for classroom talk to be at the accountable talk level, it must be accountable to 3 components. Students must be accountable to the learning community, they have to be accountable to the knowledge, and they have to be accountable to rigorous thinking. Let's take a look at each. The first component of accountable talk is being accountable to the learning community. This means there's a focus on other people's contributions during the discussions so that a student can understand, challenge, build upon, and refine their own thinking. When students are accountable to the learning community, what we would see are students that are actively participating in the classroom talk, they're listening attentively to one another, they're able to elaborate and build upon ideas and each other's contributions, and they're able to work toward the goal of clarifying or expanding their thoughts and/or their ideas. In order to be accountable to the learning community, Teachers must set up norms in the classroom around how students should interact with each other. The second component of accountable talk is being accountable to the knowledge. Students must be talking about the content and focusing on getting the content facts straight, individually or as a classroom community. When students are accountable to the knowledge, we see them making use of specific and accurate knowledge, providing evidence for their claims or arguments. They're able to identify the knowledge that may not be available yet, which is needed to address an issue. Students are working on understanding the content at a deeper level here so that they can have those deeper discussions. And the third component of accountable talk is being accountable to the rigorous tasks. Students' focus is on what their peers discuss to build a logical, coherent line of argument. When students are accountable to a rigorous task, they are able to synthesize several sources of information, construct explanations, formulate conjectures or a hypothesis, test their own understanding, challenge the quality of each other's evidence and reasoning, and the talk is accountable to generally accepted standards of reasoning. So if we want our student productive conversations at the accountable talk level of the continuum, all three of these must be present and easily observed. Students must be accountable to the learning community, the knowledge, and rigorous thinking. If students are missing one of these three areas, they are simply engaging in student talk. Again, students must defend or argue in order for true accountable talk to occur. So in conclusion, the state standards will dictate the type of conversations occurring in the classroom. If a student task is at a DOK 1 or 2 level, student talk would be appropriate. If the task is at a DOK 3, then the accountable talk is the strategy to use. And then you would be looking for all three of these areas. Here are some questions for you and or your team to discuss based on this short webinar. Where are the gaps with student productive conversations at your school? If no gaps, where are areas you can capitalize on? What are the most appropriate tasks or questions for student talk and accountable talk? What does accountable talk look like in the classroom, and how are you strategic when using this strategy? As you deepen your understanding of productive student conversations, you can find additional resources on this topic in the resource folder. This webinar series is brought to you by Meteor Education and the Center for College and Career Readiness. For more information about how Meteor Education can help you develop high-impact learning experiences, go to meteoreducation.com.